I could do it in my sleep and it makes so much sense. But just over and over and over again, like 98% of people would sit there and go, oh God, that makes complete sense. I had no idea why I was addicted. And so I'm like, man, we need to really just create so much more education, because we can't change what we don't understand. We can't change what we're not aware of. And we fear what we don't understand as well, And so once people can understand that, hey, yes, I'm addicted right now, and I am for a very good reason. Right now, I might have to then dig into those specific exact reasons, but there's very, very good reasons there as to why I need drugs or alcohol to cope with my life and my existence.
Boom. Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to another show. Now, I'm aware that I've done an introduction before you guys are listening to this, because I tend to fuck them up, Ryan. So I do them after the show, but I feel compelled to introduce Ryan. And we were talking beforehand, just last year for me personally was crazy. And I've been meaning to kind of have Ryan on and chat to him a bit more and do some more stuff through our Real Drug Talk platform, because it's kind of funny. Ryan has been someone that really has been a leader in the space, and actually in terms of proximity, well, not at the moment, but previously lived kind of quite close to me, or had his offices quite close to me. And it's been nothing short of amazing to see all the cool stuff that he's managed to spread throughout the alcohol and drug industry. And a lot of people might have heard of him already. So we're excited to have him on. How are you, mate?
I'm good, mate. I'm excited to be on. It's good to see your face again, as we were speaking about before you press record. It's been too long.
I know. It's crazy. I can't believe I'm thankful we're in 2021, but I can't believe it's shot past that quickly. So you're currently overseas, right? You're not in Australia.
No, so we were pretty much neighbours for a while there, once we connected, and you said, oh, hey, my office and I live just around the corner from you. Our centre was in Cheltenham for around 4 years or so. And about, what are we now? About 10 months or so ago, at the start of 2019, end of 2019, end of 2019, start of 2020, we decided to move our services online. Just before all the COVID stuff hit, funnily enough. So I don't know if we had a dream or something, I don't know. But so we moved everything online. That was, therapy online, but also moving more into the education space and also practitioner space. And we had a young boy, still do have a young boy. He was 1 at the time, if that. And he's 2 now, and we thought while he was young, we wanted to do a bit of travel, and if we moved our business online, we were able to do the travel. So we've been in Thailand for the last 10 months, and I put, for those just listening, air quotes, stuck in Thailand. It's a really, really nice place to be stuck. So we've been here for the last 10 months or so, and working online, spending a lot of time with our boy, and sort of doing what we can, mate.
Mate, that's unbelievable. And for a lot of people listening, I actually imagine that there's probably a few people that have seen a lot of yours and Mel's stuff through the Centre of Healing. Because that's what I think is awesome about what Ryan's done, is he's sort of, again, I was saying this to Ryan, it's not for us, but, inverted commas, brought some of the stuff that really works in addiction treatment to the forefront through, his social media platforms and stuff. And it's been really cool to see a lot of people have that shift. So I'm excited to talk a bit about that. But I actually wanted to chat to you about what got you into all of this and your personal story and journey with, addiction and mental health and stuff like that. Because, I've seen little snippets and stuff through some cool videos on social media, but I've never heard like kind of the sequential blow by blow story. Yeah. So
where should I start from? Birth or conception?
Let's go before conception. Let's go in the womb.
Let's go to my past life as a cobbler or something. So look, I was a tradesman, I was an air conditioning mechanic for 11 years, and now became, trauma therapist and business owner, and working with people with addiction and mental health issues.
That's a massive shift, isn't it?
I know. I always tell people, I'm like, you don't do it on a whim. You don't just decide I want to go for this career change. You have to have kind of gone through some stuff in your own personal journey. So for me, if I want to date things back, like let's start to maybe when I was around 10 years old. probably like grade 3 or 4 at school, and I started to get these feelings of anxiety, daily. And back then, I would have never had the language of that. I would have never been like, "Hey, I'm anxious," or "Hey, I'm feeling this." I was in a household like many, many other kids who, loving parents, mum and dad are awesome, but we never spoke about emotions. We never sat down at the end of the day and said, "Hey, how are you feeling?" It was like, how did we do at school? How are we doing with footy? How are we doing with cricket? All of that kind of stuff. But it was something that was never spoken about. But looking back now, I would start to get these feelings of, I call it dread, in my day-to-day life, whether that was in social situations, in situations at school, even around sport. Like, I was just a sport mad kid, like a lot of boys in Australia, and I ended up quitting football and cricket at the age of around 14. And I remember at the time, I just said, "Oh, I don't like it anymore." But that wasn't true. I wasn't being honest. I would just get so much anxiety and fear and pressure on myself around playing well, that I ended up quitting, because I hated those feelings that were going on in the system. So I sort of dealt with these feelings of, I would call, dread and anxiety, without telling anyone. I thought maybe I was the only one who felt it, or I just wanted to escape from those feelings. So I would not do things that would bring those feelings on. So, even at school, looking back, I was always just trying to blend in, trying to be one of the sheep, not kind of stand out too much. I never did that well at school, but I did enough to get by, and just sort of went through life. And I got to sort of those early teenage years, and I found alcohol, like a lot of kids do. And I noticed, not consciously, but looking back, this is what happened. I started drinking this liquid, and I'm like, hang on, those feelings of dread and anxiety are starting to go away for a short amount of time. So that started, a lot of drinking, a lot of binge drinking throughout my teenage years. Like, that's not too unnormal when it comes to our culture.
So can I ask, because that's really interesting. I actually got hair stand up on my arms there, because very similar story. I've never heard anyone really articulate it like that, to be honest. I was really into sport. I had that kind of anxiety as well. And the thing I wanted to ask you, and for people listening, because that's exactly the same thing that happened to me. With when I picked up alcohol and drugs, it kind of felt like those feelings went away. But I would say at the time, I just wasn't like conscious of it. Were you like conscious that, oh, this is actually taking these feelings of anxiety away, or you were just sort of going with it? You just knew that you felt better.
I was completely unconscious. I was unconscious of the feelings that I was having, the reason why alcohol was so attractive to me. I was just in an unconscious state. I had no idea. This is now me with all the knowledge that I have and understanding now, looking back and going, oh, this is what was happening with that kid. And this is often why it's good, when I start to talk to people who are coming in now as an adult with an issue with drugs, alcohol, depression, anxiety, you can start to help them understand themselves a little bit better. Because those feelings that I was having, which I never even had a label for, the dread or the anxiety or the fear, I just knew that it was yuck, and I would do anything I could to not feel it or to get away from it, And so when I had alcohol, I didn't think, oh, that feeling's going away. I just thought, wow, this is great. I can talk to people and not worry so much about what they're thinking of me, and those inhibitions come down. But like I said, for a short amount of time. And then, I went through, and I had this idea in my head that I would never do like illegal drugs. I smoked a bit of pot, but like pot, just did not agree with me for whatever reason. I did it a few times. I had a good mate who smoked it all the time, and I do it a few times with him. And I just, I just didn't like it. I'd become just a bit of a zombie. Whereas I liked, and this started a love affair with stimulants later on in my life, but I always liked stimulants as opposed to depressants. And it was my 20th birthday that my friend said, hey, we're getting some ecstasy tablets. Do you want to try? And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And that started a whole new love affair from there, because I thought, hey, if alcohol is making that feeling go away for a bit, for a short amount of time, this tablet, this is making it completely disappear, right? And all of a sudden, I'm like, wow, I can connect with strangers. I can connect with my friends on a deeper level than I normally would. I just don't feel fear in regards to situations in my life. And, it's funny, from that point on, I thought to myself at the time, I'm like, all right, I'm going to do this as much as possible for the foreseeable future. Yeah. And once again, this is hindsight looking back. I may have had an inkling at the time, but never thought too deeply about it. But I would always find it strange that I had different groups of friends that we would go out with, and I was going every weekend. Like I said, as soon as Friday night it was on, till Sunday night or Monday morning. I'd be a zombie at work till about Wednesday or Thursday, come good, and then the whole cycle would start again. And that happened for a couple of years. And basically, I always thought it was strange because I'd go out with these groups of friends and they would be taking the exact same drug in the exact same amount, and they would have a bit of fun. It was someone's birthday, they'd have a bit of fun, and they wouldn't do it again for a few months and not really think about it. And maybe it was another celebration and it was available and they'd do it. And I was like, what is wrong with them? Like for me, like it was having such a different effect. I just wanted to do it over and over again. It's like looking back now, it's like the exact same substance in the same amount, but a different effect for the individual. Why? Because I have all this underlying dread and anxiety, not to mention anger, sadness, all these emotions that I was unconscious of that were bubbling away in my system that would disappear for that amount of time. So it's like it's raising me up much more than someone else. Whereas if someone else has a different baseline and they might, feel really good and have a great time and then have the shitty come down and be like, all right, I'll do that again maybe in a few months. So always very interesting in hindsight to look back. So that started, ecstasy, speed, moved on to ice, GHB, ketamine, kind of whatever was available in the party drug kind of scene, raves every weekend, that kind of thing. I would, looking back, kind of call myself a functional drug addict at that point because, there was, if we're looking at a definition of addiction, I think Gabor Mate has a very good definition. It's like any behavior, doesn't have to be drugs, any behavior that you find craving in or relief in doing, but despite it having negative consequences in other areas of your life, you're unable to stop. And it definitely was having negative consequences in other areas of my life, especially at work. I was unable to function. I was missing, family events and that kind of thing. So I'd rather go out and use drugs as opposed to catch up on the weekend with family. So, I was still somehow holding down my job as an air conditioning mechanic. Met a girl, fell in love. I was doing all the right things from an outside looking in perspective. We got a house, a mortgage, got the dog. Kind of the next step was kids and a happily ever after story. And a lot of friends and family would just look at my life and go, man, he is just absolutely killing it. He's got this high paying job and the wife and blah, blah, blah. But internally, now moving into my mid to late 20s, I'm still struggling with this anxiety, this dread, which once again, I still don't have language for. And I still won't tell anyone about. Yeah. And I think we'll get to the issue of vulnerability, but I had this strong belief and these strong walls up around letting anyone know what I was feeling inside. Even my ex-wife, I was with her for 10 years and, I divulged a bit, but I would never tell her what was really going on because I literally didn't have the capacity to do that. And I don't want to stereotype, but a lot of men have that trouble. It's like, even if I do have a lot of stuff going on inside, I don't even have the language or the capacity or the confidence in myself to be able to articulate that to someone else. And that doesn't have to be a therapist, but even like, wife, family member, whoever it is.
So where do you think that belief came from?
I'll tell you. I'll tell you. Because that's the work, a lot of the work that I do now is finding out where these beliefs actually come from, And so I get to the point where I'm kind of this functional drug addict and it's getting quite bad. And, when the ice, the methamphetamine comes in, that adds another level because then I'm awake for like, a long time, days and days at a time. And then all of a sudden my marriage breaks down because of these, me holding everything in, we just slowly were drifting apart. Yeah. And when you don't address that, you get to a point where you're like, oh shit, you're over here and I'm over here. And that we ended up breaking up. And that was something that I just didn't see happening. And so this was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And I kind of went from functional drug addict to very dysfunctional drug addict in a very short amount of time. So, I left my job, started using ice and GHB every day, ran through whatever money I had at that point. We'd sold our house that we had together, had a little bit of money from that, blew through that really fast. Once the money was gone, I started dealing to support my habit, which is what 99% of dealers are doing. They're just trying to support their own habit. I moved out to a drug house in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, a place where people just came and went all the time. No one really slept. I was dating a girl who was a drug addict and dealer as well. And I just went really just head first into that lifestyle, So my whole day, it's not an easy life, but it's a simple life because my whole day consisted of buying, selling, and using drugs. That was it. That was my only things on my mind every day. Right. And so I would go through this cycle, and I would, I'd be awake for about 4 days at a time. I'd sleep for about 20 to 24 hours, awake for 4 days at a time. Barely eating, like forgetting to eat. I'd be on the way to a drug deal and see like a McDonald's at 3 a.m. or something. And I'm like, oh shit, I haven't eaten in a day. Bang, pull in, smash some food, go out. So I lost just a massive amount of weight. And then also running into trouble with the law, overdosing. Like I was using really high amounts of GHB and methamphetamine every day. I was overdosing on GHB every second day, if not every day. One of them was at the wheel of my car on a freeway. I thank the universe or whoever that I didn't run into another car, and I just ran into a concrete wall. So just life was just a complete mess. I ended up in a high-speed car chase. I was with a girl who would, I'll tell the story quickly because it's a good one.
Yeah.
Because when I crashed my car on the freeway, it was a write-off, and so I had no car to get around and deal drugs. And so I had these two people who would drive for me, so to speak. And then this one day they weren't available, so a friend of a friend's like, oh, I know someone, and so that they were driving me around. And anyway, we drive into a car park in Boronia, out in the east of Melbourne, and a car pulls in behind us, a four-wheel drive, Ford Territory, and she starts freaking out. She's like, oh, I think that's undercover cops. I'm like, yeah, who cares? Don't worry about it. And so we keep driving, and they follow us for a minute or so, and then the lights come on, and she's like, oh shit. And I'm like, I just pull over. I had a heap of drugs in the boot, but I'm like, we'll just see what they want. And then she looks at me and goes, sorry, and just plants her foot and speeds out of this car park. And she runs through these red lights. There's cars going this way. I'm like, what are you doing?
Wow.
She's like, oh, this car's stolen. I'm like, right. You probably should have told me that before we jumped in the car. And so we had a high-speed car chase all through the east of Melbourne. We ended up in a park in Roeville with about 10 cop cars chasing us across a park. And anyway, crazy stuff, right? So I ended up getting
Did you get away?
No. I got to a point where I'm like, I can keep running or I can stop, but I can see these police about 100 meters away running. And then in my head, because what I'd done, I'd thrown my bag of phones and drugs and everything over this fence. And then I thought to myself, well, hang on, they're probably going to catch me anyway. I was in the passenger seat, didn't know the car was stolen. I'm just going to see what happens, right? So they get me, arrest me, back of the divvy van, take me into the police station, questioning me for a few hours. And they were, just about to let me go because I'm like, yeah, I only met this girl last night. I don't even know who she is, blah, blah, blah. And then an off-duty police officer walking his dog had seen me throw this bag over a fence. So
Unbelievable.
They went and retrieved the bag. So just before they let me go, they came in and just went, we found your bag. And that had like 3 phones, all messages about, $4,000 or $5,000 worth of drugs in it. And so that I was done. I was finished, So I ended up spending a few nights in remand. That was kind of a moment. I remember sitting in, can't remember which jail it was, but I was just sort of in this, classic concrete cell, just white cell, looking at this white wall. And I'm just thinking, how the hell did I end up here? How the hell did this, middle-class kid with a loving family from Mooroolbark end up sitting in a jail cell starting to withdraw from ice and GHB? And crazy moment, and I did a lot of soul searching in there for those few nights that I was in jail. And I ended up, I got out on bail. It was classic. I was transferred into the city in this cell with 6 other guys, all day, and toilet in the corner. And I ended up, because I'd never been in that situation before. I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. Then all of a sudden I get the handcuffs taken out into a courtroom. There's like kids on excursion from school in the courtroom. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And I got bailed, and I got bailed. And kind of just pushed out into the middle of the streets of Melbourne on a Thursday afternoon. And no one had known I'd been arrested. And I had no money because they'd taken all my money because they're proceeds of crime, and they'd taken my cards. And I had I had like a Coles Myer $20 voucher or something that someone had used to buy drugs off me like a week before. So I went and got some food because I was fucking starving. And then I go to like an internet cafe in the city, and I said to the guy, mate, I've just got out of remand. I have no money. Can I use your internet for like 1 minute? And he was nice. He said, yeah. messaged a friend and they picked me up. And it was funny because that time that I was in prison, I was, detoxing now from the drugs because I've been using them every day for a long time. And I'm like, I'm going to get back in touch with mum and dad, get back in touch with my friends, because I'd shut them out during the worst of my addiction. I mean, every addict knows that there's so much guilt and shame in the system. Yeah. And a lot of people who kind of look at the addict from an outside and go, oh, they're just selfish, they don't give a fuck. I'm yet to meet an addict who hasn't got so much guilt and shame in their system. It's
100%. I actually say the guilt and shame is the biggest killer of people that use drugs, for that very reason, that they just, there's so much pent up that's just kind of hanging in the middle of their chest, that they just use so many drugs, and if they're unlucky, they pass away. But it's guilt and shame that's driving that. I see that so often.
Couldn't agree more. And it's like a counterintuitive thing that happens, because we get stuck in this loop. Because it's like, say I said that I wasn't going to use, and then I go and do it, or whatever behavior it is, can be anything. Then it's like, well, I have to make myself feel guilty or shameful, because that means I won't do it again. It's the exact opposite. Because if we're using a compulsive behavior, it means we have an inability to sit with our emotions that are uncomfortable. So if I'm stewing in guilt and shame, what am I going to do? Oh, I'm going to do that thing that makes it go away. And then I keep going and going and going and going, and it just starts this perpetual loop. So, for me, the way that I dealt with that guilt and shame was to just completely detach from close friends and family. So I hadn't spoken to them for quite some time, and they'd try and call me, message me, and I just wouldn't reply, because I just couldn't let them see the person that I had become, really in that moment. And so, in jail, I had just decided so much. I'm letting them back in. I'm going to stop using. I'd made all these plans, and I said, enough's enough. After I got out, I got bailed. Less than an hour later, I was using again. all of those, the grand plans of what I was going to do went out the window, because as soon as I went back into the real world, I had all of this stuff that I hadn't dealt with, and I just needed to use. Once again, Jack, I'm still very unconscious of why I'm using. Right. And this is why it's so important for people. The first step is to try and gain some sort of understanding around, so why do I use? Because I would hang in circles, and you've been there as well, Jack, and a lot of other people, I can see, who were addicts, and they'd been sexually abused, when they were from 5 till 10, or someone had been sent away to a camp and been physically abused. And I'm like, oh, that all makes sense. Why am I so fucked up? Not realizing that I was traumatized in my own way. So this lifestyle, I went back to using. I got arrested again. But like, I knew something needed to change, because I was up on quite serious charges. I was up on, commercial trafficking and all this other stuff. So I said, I'd best try and organize some sort of, detox or rehab. And I was purely doing it just so it would look good for the court case. I really didn't know how to stop at that point. So I started Googling. I'm like, what do drug addicts do? Oh, that's right, they go to rehab. So I started Googling rehab, and I'm like, all right, there seems to be two options here. There's public or private. Private was looking like $30,000+, and I'm like, I certainly don't have that, and I'm not going to put that on my parents. And then public at the time in Victoria was a 6-month waiting list, and I'm like, I haven't got 6 months. The way I was living my life, 3 months I was going to end up dead or permanently in jail, way I was going. So I ended up doing a home-based detox with a government company. So basically you get a bit of help, you get a care and recovery worker, a nurse who touches base, and they kind of set you up with appointments. So you can set you up with a doctor, set you up with a psychologist, but you're just doing it from home. So basically,
it's actually a really good, and like, in terms of just a public health initiative, it's actually a really good option for a lot of people, particularly when you were like you, where you were just really desperate for something to change, it sounds like.
Yeah. No, it was, and the people that I saw in that were fantastic. And, I got clean at home for 12 days. But then I stopped, because every addict knows, like, you can stop, right? Stopping's not the hard bit. Staying stopped is the problem.
That's right.
So I'd stopped, but I hadn't addressed the reasons why I'd become a drug addict in the first place, So I got clean for 12 days. I reconnected with my family and friends, which I consider myself super lucky, because there's so many people who go through addiction and they push people away so much that when they are ready for help and to be vulnerable, that their friends and family have kind of been hurt or burnt so many times. They're like, nah, get fucked. Like, you've burned us too many times. I was so lucky, because I had, it started with my friends. I was like, you know, might have been 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning one morning. And after I'd been arrested, all of a sudden, because all my worldly possessions had been taken. So the money and the drugs, that was all that I had. And so now all of a sudden I wasn't the guy who had all the drugs. So all my good friends in that world stopped messaging me. They weren't checking in to see if I was okay. And I was on my, I was scrolling through some messages. I wasn't on a phone because my phones had been confiscated. I was on an Xbox. So my old housemate, which I'd gone back to his house, had an Xbox, and you can go on the internet with an Xbox. It's really awkward with a controller. And so I was scrolling through old messages, and I'd seen all these messages from, you know, however long before, from friends going, mate, where are you? We miss you. We love you. And I had this moment where I was like, fucking hell, I've given up all these amazing people for these people who now don't give a shit about me because I don't have all the drugs and that kind of thing. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to reach out and message. So my friend Milosh, I messaged him on the Xbox. Now imagine on the Xbox, you have to like go up to a letter and select, then to the next letter and select. So it takes fucking ages. So I wrote like, hey man, and that took me ages to write. And so he's got this message, first time he's heard from me in, I don't know, 9 months, a year or something. And he starts freaking out. He's like, bro, where are you? What's going on? And I'm still trying to write the next message, and it's taken forever because he thinks he's going to lose me again because I'm taking too long to reply. So I was so lucky. So him and another friend rock up on my door like literally an hour later. Two other friends rock up a couple of hours after that. And then we organized to go and see my parents. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It's so hard to have, you know, really compassionate and loving parents, to be able to go to them and just say, hey, your son's a drug addict, he's a drug dealer, he's up on serious criminal charges, and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But it had to be done. And once again, very, very lucky. Mum and dad clearly devastated by that, but still like, okay, what do we do? How can we help? You know, so I was very lucky in that respect. So, did this home-based detox, you know, went and saw a doctor. But once again, the mainstream system, like the doctor was good, but all he's doing is just giving me drugs to try and help me sleep. You know, antipsychotics, you know, Zyprexa, that kind of thing. And it does work to help sleep, but like a lot of people do have a trouble then getting off those kind of things, especially if they get prescribed Valium or whatever it is. So what happened, I relapsed after 12 days. I got back on it, and I got back on it for about a week. And that was kind of the week that changed my life, so to speak. You know, I got arrested again during that week. I was set up with an appointment with a psychologist on the Friday of that week. So my care and recovery worker had set that up. So, yep, your appointment's on Friday. I'm like, all right, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to talk about, but I'm just going to go and, you know, it'll be good just to talk about stuff, right? So I started telling family, telling friends, I'm going to talk to someone, looking forward to it. So I guess the Thursday morning at about 10 a.m., I'm just on the couch off my face again, and I'm just deleting old messages off a phone. And I get to this message from the start of the week from my care and recovery worker saying, oh, so just a reminder, that psychologist appointment's Thursday at 9 o'clock. And I'm like, oh, fuck, like I just missed it. So, because in my head, I thought it was Friday at 9, but it was Thursday. And so I just missed it. And so I'm beating myself up. I'm like, oh, you fucking idiot, blah, blah, blah. I've missed it. And then like less than an hour later, I get a message on Facebook from an old acquaintance, Melissa, who I'd met maybe a couple of years prior. We were doing a talk on health, funnily enough. And I knew that she was a therapist, but she just reached out randomly and just said, hey, what's been going on? I haven't kind of seen or heard from you in a while. Now, classic me, I would just deflect. I'd never talk about my own stuff. So I'm like, I just said I could write you a book on my last, you know, year or two. But how are you? You know, how's business? Blah, blah, blah. Just deflected. And I thought the conversation was over. And then she shoots me one more message just on Messenger. And she goes, I feel a lot of hurt in your heart. And I'm like, I can't argue with that. I can't argue with that. I'm like, yes. Yeah, what are you getting at? And then she goes, oh, can you do something for me, a little exercise? I'm like, yeah, all right, whatever. So she goes, grab a pen and paper and go somewhere by yourself. So like I had people in my house who I was using drugs with, grab my laptop. I'm like, I'm just going to my room, boys. I'm talking to someone. So I went in there, and she goes, you left or right hand? I'm like, I'm a lefty. She goes, use your right hand and just write on that bit of paper some of the things that you're feeling at the minute. Like just tune into your body and just write whatever comes out. And it was really confronting for me because I wrote some words like broken, defeated, dead inside, scared,
Yep.
sad, right? And this is for someone who had made a lifestyle for pretty much their entire life of not acknowledging any negative emotions. It was quite confronting for me. And when you write with your non-dominant hand, it looks like a child's writing. It's kind of squiggly and weird. So I look down at this paper and I'm like, Jesus, this is what's actually going on inside me. So it stirred something up in me to where I said to her, all right, can I come and see you for a session? And she's like, yeah, no problem.
And was that, and sorry to interrupt, because that's an amazing story. Was that really weird? Like, just to be in that situation and just going through that? But it sounds like there was just something driving you saying this is the right thing to do. Just give it a go.
Yeah, because it was just, it was foreign. It was very challenging for me, but still it stirred up something inside to where, I don't know, some part of me went, holy crap, if this is actually what's going on inside of you, you need to explore this, right?
Yeah.
And combine that, the fact that I was meant to see this psychologist and I fucked up the dates, so I was kind of expecting to talk to someone. It was just kind of that kind of perfect storm, I suppose. And I go to her, I said, this is kind of what really locked it in for me, is that she's like, yeah, we can book in a time for next week. And I said to her, no, I need to see you tomorrow, because that was the Friday, because I had this Friday like burnt in my mind. And then about 10 minutes later, she replies, literally, someone just cancelled tomorrow and I've got an opening so you can come in. And so that's when I was like, I don't believe in much at this point in my life, but I'm just going to go in. So the next day I go in. I had no idea what she did as a therapist.
Yep.
She had no idea I was a drug addict. So I walk into her office and she admitted later to being like, whoa, what the fuck happened to this guy? Because when she saw me last, I was doing a talk on health, and I was, in reasonably fit shape and that kind of thing. And because the gym used to be another one of my addictions or coping mechanisms back in the day. And I walked into her office like 15 kilos lighter, disheveled. The funny thing she said to me later on was like, I was dressed like shit. And I remember that morning, because all I've been doing is hanging out with other drug addicts, I made a real effort to dress up as nice as possible to go in to see her. But I still looked like shit apparently. And so anyway, I sat in her office. I was in there for 3 hours, right? And we spoke about drugs for like 2 minutes, right? Because I thought the drugs were my problem. It looked quite clear if you looked at my life that drugs were the main problem in my life. Okay, not so. She explained to me that, look, we've got this whole list of emotions here and all this heavy stuff down here, this guilt, shame, anger, fear, sadness, hurt. You've got so much of that stewing in your system that you use drugs to numb it out for a short amount of time, and ice and GHB work for you. For someone else, alcohol works. For someone else, shopping works. For someone else, heroin works, But then whenever you stop using, all of this stuff comes back to the surface. Yeah. And so we keep using. We're just trying to numb out the things that are stewing in our system that we haven't dealt with. And that made intuitive sense to me. I was like, that does actually sound like my experience. So then she's like, all right, well, let's find out why we've got so much heavy emotion stored in your body. Right. So that's when we decided to jump into some memories from my past. So she was doing trauma therapy, basically, and trying to work out where a lot of emotions were stuck from my past, and also beliefs. And you spoke about the not being vulnerable one. So I had this memory from when I was 4 years old to do with my brother. So my brother, 14 years older than me, right? And he was like my hero growing up, and he's like the best brother ever. Like I would look back and be like, I would always want to kick the footy with him, and like, I'm 6 and he's 20, but he'd always do it with me. So he was just my absolute hero. So a lot of my stuff was the fear of losing him, and like when he would get girlfriends or when he moved out, and that kind of thing was a very traumatic experience for me. So there was this event when I was 4 years old when I had decided to shut down and not be vulnerable. And this is when the belief was birthed. And so from that point on, from 4 years old, then that belief just plays out in not being vulnerable in pretty much every situation in my life. And so I up until this point, I was in this office with Melissa. I would have been 30 or I think 30. And I hadn't cried for like 15 years, right?
Wow.
That's so unhealthy. Like I thought that I wore that as a badge of honor, this whole boys don't cry and all that kind of thing. And it was to do with this vulnerability thing, because like, I'm not going to let anyone see me cry. So once we went back and we dealt with that, we dealt with the emotion and the belief, and I saw where it started, and I'm like, holy crap, I've been shut down for that long. Guess what happened? I started bawling my eyes out. Like you would not believe, like all of these pent up tears just started pouring out of my face. And it was confronting, but also amazing at the same time. It was like, this is uncomfortable, but I feel like this needs to happen.
Yeah.
And so once those walls came down, when I'm like, hey, I actually can be vulnerable, then we started to look at, my marriage breakup, which I hadn't dealt with. I remember friends would ask me, like, we literally 10 years together, married, house, and like 2 weeks later, my friends are checking, how are you? I'm like, yeah, I'm over it. No problem. Bullshit. Absolutely bullshitting myself, So we had to go back and deal with all the emotion, the sadness, the anger around that marriage breaking up. And then we started to look at other events from my childhood. One of the other beliefs that we worked on in that session, which was really the key to me not using drugs anymore, was I had a deep-seated belief that not only I didn't love myself, I didn't like myself, I fucking hated who I was as a human being. And not from like the using drugs and everything, but we're talking once again from around the age of 4 or 5, just a belief was created that I hate who I am as a human being. There's something inherently wrong with me. So imagine that, right? Imagine you have a friend that you fucking hate, right? You can deal with that. You can tell your friend to fucking go home, or you can leave their house and go home. You can not be friends with them anymore. If you hate who you are as a person, there's no escape. Wherever you go, you are. So then how do we deal with that? We deal with that by creating a different state of consciousness through alcohol and drugs or whatever other means there is, because that's the only way I can escape myself, is to completely change my state of consciousness. So it made complete sense to me that that's how I would escape myself. That's what addiction is. It's a desire to escape. The desire to escape the self, because the self is too painful. Now, for me,
100%.
hating myself was very, very painful. So I went back and dealt with all the sadness, all the emotion to do with that. And then I was able to look at this little like 5-year-old kid and go, man, if that was any other kid and not me, would I say to them, you deserve to hate yourself for the rest of your life? And I'm like, man, that's so rough. I'm getting tingles now thinking about it, right? So all of a sudden, I just had massive compassion for that 5-year-old me, and I was able to realize, hey, this kid's fine. There's nothing at all wrong with him, and he deserves to love himself. And when I had that epiphany or experience, I just felt my entire body relax for the first time that I could remember, right?
Wow.
So I would call it, I felt peace for the first time, probably since before, I was 5 years old. And I'd spent my whole life, I think, trying to chase this state of excitement or high energy or enthusiasm. That's why so many stimulants involved. When all of a sudden I felt this peace, and I'm like, oh, this is what I was looking for. All of those years, the alcohol, the drugs, the compulsive gym, the women, all of that stuff, I was just searching for this. I was just searching for peace. Right. And so in that moment, I kind of realized, oh, I don't need to use drugs anymore. Because if I don't need to escape myself anymore, who needs drugs? So I sort of came out of that experience. You kind of, during that, when we're going back and looking at the memories and everything, your eyes are shut. And I kind of came out of that and opened my eyes. And it was literally, I felt like a different person, like a new human. And so I was like, wow, that was quite incredible. So I knew, I had this inner knowing now that I don't need to use drugs. So I left her office, and then I basically spent the next probably day just cutting ties with everyone in that scene. So everybody that, owed me money, I was like, hey, you don't owe me money anymore. Don't worry. I'll see you some other time. The girl I was dating, I broke up with her. I got like everything. I got sort of all my affairs in order, so to speak, and then went home and slept for 4 days, which is what you do. Toxic from ice. Slept for 4 days, woke up, and I'm like, okay, wow. If I've just gone through that, I got really curious. I'm like, what else have I got going on in here that I haven't dealt with? Because once again, I thought that nothing bad had happened to me, or I had no trauma from my childhood, or nothing went wrong, so to speak, when that wasn't true. It's such a subjective idea of what trauma is or what went wrong. And after going through that experience, I'm like, man, there's some other stuff going on in here that I can look at. So I started seeing her once a week. We're unpacking. And throughout that process, I just got curious, about, I was reading different books, watching different videos, all that kind of stuff. And, about week 6 or so, we did a session, I had the vision or the epiphany that I was going to open up a center one day to help people who are in my situation, whether it's the drugs or alcohol, or whether it's, depression, anxiety, stress, just people that are struggling. And so I just took a deep dive into all of the teachings. I went and was doing a diploma in mental health and AOD, which was good. It was good fun. The teachers were good and all that, but that it represented the old system to me.
Yeah.
Right. Because I was the annoying kid in class. I put my hand up every 5 minutes. When are we getting to trauma? When are we getting to stored imprints from the past and blah, blah, blah. That's not part of the curriculum. I'm like, oh. So I went back to Melissa and just said, look, teach me everything that you know. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what I have to do. Just teach me. So I took a deep dive into that. I got to a point where Melissa said, all right, I've taught you everything I know. And I'm like, sweet, I'm going to open up this center. And that kind of got her fired up as well, because she'd been doing a bit of work with, some business owners, a bit of depression, anxiety. But, I'd sent her a few people in there struggling with drugs and everything as well, and they got great results. And she's like, look, if I can help you in any way, just let me know. And I said, hey, why don't we start this thing together? And she's like, all right, let's do it. So it was the Melbourne Centre of Healing back then, at the start of 2016, end of 2015, around then. And we sort of, it was, we both didn't have any money. I was in debt from my previous life. I had lawyers' fees and all that. And we got this really dingy little retro office in Hampton East. I had to borrow money off my mum and dad to pay for the first month's rent, all that kind of stuff. And we thought, look, let's start this, right? Let's help people holistically, but mainly with their trauma, okay, from their past, from their childhood, and help deal with the actual reason behind the addiction or behind the depression or behind the anxiety, and not just try and manage the symptoms and that kind of thing. And so I'm like, let's just do it. It was like an experiment. If it doesn't work, we'll just go out of business really fast, because we had no money. Like we go out of business. Or if it does work, we'll be able to keep going and hopefully see more people and grow. And so luckily, we were able to start seeing the early clients. I was lucky to get an article in the Herald Sun like the week that we opened, and that sort of got the phone ringing. Then we started getting good results, and so things happened from there, where we grew and we ended up with a team of 5 and a bigger office and all that kind of stuff. So that's where it all started. That's why I'm not a tradie anymore, Jack.
It's an unbelievable story, mate, and it's really inspiring. And again, it's funny, I find this with a lot of people, particularly yourself. I don't know if we're similar age and similar, brought up in a similar area, stuff like that. But I had the same thing. It's turned out a little bit differently, but I still went and did it. Like, I was sitting in rehab, and I was literally sitting on the chair one day, and I didn't tell anyone because I was kind of embarrassed, but I thought, I'm going to own a rehab one day. I'm going to do this. And then it happened in 2 years or something. And I was kind of doing that. And then anyway, things completely changed from there, and just my views of things and all that stuff. But it's funny how that stuff happens. And the wanting to help comes from the destruction of the past. It's really cool. It's really cool. So I want to ask you a few questions. There's so much in your story that I want to unpack. I think the thing that I kind of get the question from with a lot of people that talk to me or listen to the show and have their opinion or whatever, did you find, because it sounds like most of what drove your addiction, you only found out about it later on, but most of what drove it was all the stuff that you said going on underneath the surface, the trauma and the negative belief systems, all that stuff. But did you find that there was any physical elements that came into play that, you hear a lot of people talking about addiction is it's like a personality, or it's a disease, or there's a physical component? And also, did you find that there was some drugs that were worse than others and kind of more addictive than others? Did that come into play at all in your story?
Yeah, look, there's a physical component to it when you're using, definitely, because any drug is going to have an effect on the physiology that you're going through. So that's why, when someone is using, then there's going to be a physical hook to keep using. But that's only part of the story, because before I started using every day, I would go through these binges, right? And so it's you would binge beyond drugs, you'd go through the detox, the withdrawal phase, and your body would return to homeostasis to a degree. But then I kept wanting to, during that come down phase, you're like, I'm never fucking doing this again, right?
That's right.
A week later, you're like, I'm definitely doing this again, right?
Yeah.
So it's you've come back to baseline from a physiological point of view, but then we keep wanting to use and we keep wanting to do it. right? So it's there's a physical component, but it's definitely emotional and psychological. That's the biggest hook for people. You
Yeah.
know, it's like Dr. Carl Hart out of Columbia University has done some wonderful studies, and so he's shown
Interesting.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he's shown that of all the people who start using drugs, about 10 to 20% become dependent or addicted, right? Which
Yeah.
means 80 to 90% don't,
Mm.
right? And this is what the general public don't understand, yeah? Because we have this, these different ads on TV or different campaigns where they say like not even once, or, you do it once, you're hooked, or 3 times you're hooked. And I'm just like, stop feeding people bullshit. And this is
Yeah.
where I think drug education in school needs to change massively as well. Because all we're trying to do is trying to scare kids and tell them don't ever do drugs, right? So imagine if you have a drug education program, right? And the big message is like, just don't do it. But then maybe 80% of it is actually quite good information. What happens? Kids grow up and they're going to do drugs. Like we experiment with drugs. That's what we do. What they do, they try drugs and they feel great. Then what happens? They think back to the education and go, that was all bullshit because they told me never to do it and they're horrible. Now I've done it and they're great. So they just throw everything they might have learned, all that good information out the window as well. So then the question becomes, if 10 to 20% of people who start using drugs become addicted, what makes that 10 to 20% susceptible to addiction? Right. And people will think like, nah, but for heroin and methamphetamine, it must be way higher than that. It's not. All drugs fall between that 10 to 20%, So then, what makes them susceptible? And so from my point of view, it's this trauma, this emotional baggage we're holding on to from the past that's giving us a desire to escape. This is why when I first started using ecstasy, like I said, my friends, no dependence or addiction. They just every few months have a bit of fun. Me, I would be either using it or thinking about using it pretty much all the time, right?
Yeah.
There's no evidence to say that there's some sort of genetic predetermination for addiction or alcoholism. Now, maybe there's a predisposition, so maybe you might be more likely, but there's no predetermination. There's nothing like that's been found, right? So even if someone has a predisposition to addiction, then if we create an environment where we're not accumulating trauma or we've dealt with it and our actual environment in our life is healthy, then we're very, very unlikely to fall down the path of addiction. And plus, the field of epigenetics says that let's say that there was hypothetically, and there's not, an addiction or alcohol gene, then if you lived your life a certain way, that gene may never get turned on your entire life.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And I love asking people the questions, like obviously I'm like you, I've done all the reading on it and stuff. And that's the thing that has been very kind of confusing for me in this whole like transformational journey. I'm interested to ask you about it as well, is that, unlike yourself, I kind of found, I'm very grateful that, I found recovery in one way or another, but I sort of came through that traditional system, went into a rehab, got told that I had a disease, did the 12-step programs, which in a lot of ways saved my life and was fantastic for many years. But then just as I've kind of gone through lots of different transformations and stuff myself, come to think differently through researching stuff and all that sort of jazz, and have found exactly the same thing, that, the academic literature is very, very inconclusive of any kind of disease or any kind of physical condition that says this is exactly what addiction is. It's not like diabetes or anything like that, where the medical field goes, no, this is actually what happens in the organs in your body, and this is how. There's nothing like that for addiction. So
that's actually sorry to cut you off, Jack. That's actually a good analogy, because if you think about type 1 and type 2 diabetes,
that's right.
So it's like, that's what the disease model of addiction would say. It's like type 1 diabetes, right? Whereas I would say it's much more like type 2 diabetes. And so here's the thing: type 2 diabetes can be reversed through lifestyle and through what you're eating and that kind of thing. Not to say addiction will be fixed by what you're eating, but I'm saying there are steps that you can take to reverse that. So it's like, I don't have to have type 2 diabetes for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the question I want to ask you is, so how many years has it been now since you've been like in recovery and you went through that whole journey?
Hang on, let me think, Jack. I'm not a day counter. It's somewhere between 5 and 6 years. I think 5.5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can I ask you, do you drink now, or do
Yes.
you take any other drugs or anything? So you do drink. So how does that work? Because that's what a lot of people have questions about as well when they come into this whole space. You know, people ask me that all the time. Like, can I drink again, or can I be kind of, for a lack of a better word, like normal? You know, is my life over forever? Yeah. How does that work? Because
listen to that wording. Is my life over forever?
that's
I
right.
love
That's
it.
right.
No, it's look. I'm a big fan of what works for people. Okay.
Yeah.
So I also, like, I have friends who, like, 12 step to save their life, right?
Yeah.
So they do 12 step and it saved their life. So who the fuck would I be to tell them, hey, I don't agree with this disease model. I don't agree with identifying as an addict. You shouldn't. I would never say that, because it's literally saved their life, right? So for me, I just have a different view. Like, as a society, I'll get to the drinking thing in a minute. As a society, I think we're moving from what we used to think addiction was a moral failing and a choice. And the judicial system still sees it that way. It is so fucking backwards, it's ridiculous. And I went through that whole, court system and everything, and they have no idea what addiction is, okay? It is a choice and a moral failing. So you're just making a bad choice and you're an idiot and you should be punished and put in a cage, right? Which is crazy. And so then we've kind of evolved, and the medical system, along with 12 steps, see it as a disease model, okay? Now that is much more compassionate, because at least now it's like, okay, you have a disease, we can now be open to treatment and trying to deal with that. So it is a very much more compassionate model, which is great. But now we're swinging, and a lot more people are starting to understand that we really think addiction is a coping mechanism for some deeper emotional pain and trauma and dysregulated nervous system that's going on, yeah? Because if you think about that, like, addiction really is an attempt for us to regulate our nervous system at the end of the day. Now, our nervous system gets out of whack due to the way it's adapted in those early years and throughout our life, and so we try, and if our nervous system's way too chaotic and intense and hectic, we try and numb it with some sort of depressant. If our nervous system's just shut down and we're in some sort of freeze response, we'll try and ramp it up with a stimulant. And we're always trying to make that balance. We're always trying to get home, and the thing is, drugs don't fully work, but they work a little bit. And this beautiful saying I heard recently is, we can never get enough of something that almost works. And when a drug addict finds that a drug almost works, but it's the best option they've got, they don't know what else could possibly work, so they keep going for it. So when it comes to drinking, so what I did personally, and this is kind of something I recommend for clients, I've had clients who don't full sobriety and just don't drink, even though their drug of choice might have been ice or cocaine or something, right? And that's okay. For a lot of them, what I did is I just tested it. I was clean off everything for a few months, and I hadn't had alcohol for a long time, because you don't take GHB with alcohol. It doesn't mix. And I was on GHB.
Definitely doesn't mix.
I was on GHB literally every moment that I was awake. So after I was clean for everything for a few months, it was around footy finals time, right? And my Kangas were playing. We don't play much in the finals these days, but we did back then. And so I was going out with a few boys to the pub to watch it, and my best mate was going. And what I did, I just thought, I might try having a beer tonight. Because what happened in the past, same with drugs. When I would drink, I just would drink to excess, and I couldn't stop. I would stop until I literally would start passing out, or I would drink until then I went to get drugs, right? So it was just it was always this extreme, want to escape. Now, the work that I'd done on my own trauma, I didn't feel that need to escape. So I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have a different experience when I drink beer, but I don't know, because I haven't done it. So I messaged my mate before we went, and I said, Phil, I'm like, hey mate, just to let you know, I'm going to have a couple of beers tonight. First time I've done it in a long time. I just wanted to let you know, I think I'll be okay, but just like keep an eye on me, but I was going to keep an eye on myself as well. So we went out, watched the footy. I may have had 2 pints, had a bit of fun, went home, went to bed. And I woke up the next morning, I'm like, oh, that was cool. No gremlins, no desire to drink more, no desire to get drugs, right? None of that kind of stuff, right? So now when I drink, you know, it'll be in a social situation and I can have 1 or 2 drinks. So once again, it's like how I spoke about when I was younger with the ecstasy with me and my friends. Now I'm talking about me. So alcohol, same substance, right? One experience over here where I can't stop, one experience over here where I can have 1 or 2 and stop. Exact same substance. So what changed? The change was the desire to escape.
Yeah.
Right. So now, like after a drink or 2, I'm like, you know, I want to wake up fresh tomorrow. I don't want to have any more. But like I said, for some people, you know, who are worried about it, because the whole thing's fear. Okay. And this is where a lot of that, you know, I'll have to start my days again if I have a drink or blah, blah. It's all very fear. And like, and that's why, you know, I'm not a fan of, you know, getting to the end of the day and going, yes, I didn't do drugs today. Let's see how I go tomorrow. I'm more focused. I don't even think about it. You know, people are like, do you get cravings? I'm like, no, because I don't think about it. Or they say, do you reckon you'll ever use drugs again? And I say, I don't know. Well, what do you mean? Does that mean you will? I'm like, I don't know because I don't think about it. I'm thinking about what I want to create for my family or my business or that inner peace that I'm trying to cultivate, you know, still 5 years down the track. It's sort of, you know, we don't want to be making decisions out of fear, in my opinion. Because this is an important topic because I started going to NA because I was in the process of kind of formulating how the center was going to look. And a friend was going to NA and I'm like, I'll come with you to some meetings. And I thought the community aspect was great. I think people that are getting together who all kind of have a common goal, it's like we want to get past this and want to get better. And community is so very important. But then I saw people as well who had been clean for like 10 plus years. And I'm like, they're not really clean because they are so fucking angry. They are so pissed off. And I feel like they're holding on every day. They're holding on for dear life. And that's why I see getting clean, like drugs is just part of that. You know, there's no point in getting clear from drugs if you're just going to be anxious and pissed off every day of your life.
Yeah, mate, super interesting. I love the way that you talk about it because it is a hard thing to explain because there's a lot of complexity around it. And it's interesting what you said. I'm kind of largely the same. You know, it's funny because I've had lots of different experiences right throughout the recovery space, just in terms of my own personal journey. And, you know, if it's working for people, I won't go and actively tell them that it's bad for you to, you know, think of yourself as an addict. And I agree with you. I think there's, from having experienced it myself and it being such a large part of changing my life, the community aspects of 12-step programs, all that stuff is magic. But I actually think that it's very unhelpful for people to think of themselves as like an addict, you know, and it's something that I've come to learn in the last sort of 3 years, like that when you can change the beliefs that you have about yourself and the identity that you form for yourself, there's this whole kind of cascading effect that happens with the rest of your life and your behavior and everything. And it kind of changes the programming largely, because that's what I've seen as maybe one of the negative aspects is thinking about addiction through that kind of paradigm in 12-step. I've seen people that go like 30 years without using drugs, right? But in that 30 years, they tell themselves, I'm an addict. Even if I pick up again after 30 years, it's going to end up just like it was 30 years ago when I was like 25. You know, I'm an addict. And they sort of tell themselves this story for so long that if they do have a drink, the programming kind of kicks in unconsciously, and then boom, like their whole life just blows up and everybody goes, how the fuck did that happen? It's this crazy disease in the background, but really it's just this kind of programming. It's the same as like marketing essentially for McDonald's. You know, you see the ad for the burger enough times on the TV, even though you know consciously that it's unhealthy to eat. If you just have that barrage in your head, you're going to go and eat it. Like, and that's proven that happens to humans. So yeah, it's really interesting. So I actually talk to people about that a lot. Like, you know, maybe there's a different way to think about yourself in terms of not being an addict, just someone that needs to work through some stuff. So yeah, it's interesting.
Beliefs always want to perpetuate themselves. And so if I've told myself that, you know, I know that if I pick up a drink, I won't be able to stop, and that becomes a belief, then guess what? When I do pick up a drink, I won't be able to stop. And then that'll confirm the belief. See, I told you you wouldn't be able to stop. And it's like
That's
these
right.
loops that keep perpetuating. You're exactly right there. So yeah, it's like, you know, I always tell people you stopped being an addict the day you stopped using drugs, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people understand that more, I think, and this is why we've been moving a lot more into the education space as well, because, you know, like you spoke about at the start, this is kind of stuff that we, you know, being in this industry for a while, and it's just, we find it weird that it could be seen as an alternative view, because it just makes so much sense. And after working with
Yeah.
people, you see it happen over and over again. And the amount of times when we had the physical center, so the center was an outpatient kind of rehab, so to speak. So we're doing
Yeah.
trauma therapy, a kinesiologist working with the body, some, you know, natural supplements to help. You know, they could reach out from home. And so it was like an all natural, holistic program, infrared sauna, float tank therapy, but the backbone was just trauma therapy. But what would happen, people would come in originally and see me for initial consultation, because, you know, and I'd sit there with them for half an hour or 45 minutes, find out about them, but then sort of explain how we work, and really in doing that, explaining to them why they're addicted, or why they've got depression, or why they've got anxiety. And for me, it just, like, you know, I could do it in my sleep, and it makes so much sense. But just over and over and over again, like 98% of people would sit there and go, oh God, that makes complete sense. I had no idea why I was addicted. And so I'm like, man, we need to really just create so much more education, because what we can't change what we don't understand. We can't change what we're not aware of. And we also, we fear what we don't understand as well, you know? And so once people can understand that, hey, yes, I'm addicted right now, and I am for a very good reason. Right now, I might have to then dig into those specific exact reasons, but there's very, very good reasons there as to why I need drugs or alcohol to cope with my life and my existence.
Yeah.
Because
So interesting.
if it's a disease that I have for life, then I'm just trying to manage all the time. And like we said, that's fine. If that's how you want to live your life, no problem, no problem at all. Yeah, but for a lot of people, that we don't want to have to just manage. You know, we can live an amazing life. Like if you had said to me when I was, you know, blowing out on GHB every day, and, you know, no money to my name, and in tattered, torn clothes, that a few years later I'd be, you know, running a successful business, living on a fucking tropical island with a 2-year-old boy, you know, I'd be like, really? is that a dream? But if I subscribe to I just need to manage things model, I wouldn't put all this pressure on myself for starting a business. I would have been worried about having a kid and all that kind of stuff. So I just don't think we want to limit ourselves, because we can change. We can change very quick.
100%, mate. I love the way that you explained it, and particularly around the fear and stuff like that. It's super spot on and really interesting. So you said that, you know, the catalyst to open the Center of Healing and work with people was obviously through your own experience and the healing experience that you had with Melissa and all that sort of stuff. And you sort of touched on it briefly there, but what you're doing now, which is, I think, and, you know, explaining a bit more, but now you're working more with professionals, I guess, teaching them this model of care and how to really kind of get to the core of people's issues and stuff like that. And as you said, the education, is that what sparked it, what you touched on? Just kind of almost like coming into work, hitting the play button and just recording like the same thing that you were saying to people every single day? Is that kind of what sparked wanting to do this with others?
Yeah. Our whole idea when we even started the center was to sort of just create this ripple effect. You know, we could see things moving in this direction anyway. Like I remember as we were sort of formulating how the center would look and everything, and I hadn't heard of people like Gabor Mate and Dr. Carl Hart and that kind of thing. And someone sent me a clip of Gabor's and made me cry. Explain, it's called "What Is Addiction?" Gabor Mate on YouTube. It goes for about 3 minutes. And I'm like, oh, there's other people in the world who have the exact same view as me, even though I haven't heard from them. And it's like,
yeah.
So we always wanted to create a ripple effect. And, you know, originally we were going to try open up different centers around the place, but then, you know, the moving online changed all that. So we thought, let's see if we can train other therapists in our method of helping people with addiction or depression, anxiety, or that kind of thing in our particular trauma therapy. So now we're still seeing clients online via Zoom. So we're doing the trauma therapy that way, but our real main focus is getting people trained in root cause therapy, which is a trauma therapy that we'd used at the center. And then also we're just launching a new modality to deal with trauma called embodied processing. Myself and Matt Nettleton are literally just launching that over the next few weeks. So once again, and it's the best feeling in the world to, see that, we have like a private Facebook group for all the students, and they'll post in there, they're like, did this session with someone yesterday, this is what happened, it was bloody amazing. And that just fills our heart, because now we can see the ripple effect, because we train someone and that changes their life and the way they show up, and then all of a sudden they work with someone dealing with alcoholism and depression, and they get an incredible result. But that doesn't just affect them, that then affects that person's family and all their friends and everything. And so the idea is just keep trying to spread the love in sort of whatever way that we can, and then we kind of combine that. We've got different online courses for families of addiction, understanding trauma. What else have we got? Just self-inquiry, like investigating our relationship to our thoughts and emotions. So, because once again, education, like I said, when I do those consults, just that education piece, once people start to understand the situation. And the families one's really interesting, because we made that course, and I'm like, I don't know if families are going to want to hear this, because we're basically telling families to address their own part of it and stop trying to fix the person. But we've had just an amazing response from that. So I think people are in a place where they do want to hear a little bit more truth around that. So yeah, it's education, and it's obviously trying to create that ripple effect and training a lot of other people to deal with these issues in a different way.
Amazing. So I wanted to ask you, because, and you even said it for yourself at the start, when people listen to the show, obviously trauma is coming a lot more into the vernacular, I think, not just around addiction, but around a lot of things. And a lot of people will say to me, just like you said, oh, I've got this addiction issue, but I don't have any trauma. Like, I never got sexually assaulted, or I grew up in a loving family, or whatever it is. So can you just explain what trauma actually is a little bit more, and flesh it out?
Yeah, so we're kind of getting into semantics, because we can all, we've all got a different meaning for words at the end of the day. So I suppose it's kind of how you define it. I classify trauma as it's like a samskara in the Hindu literature. It's an impression that gets left on us. It's an undigested life experience. Okay.
Yeah.
So we classically think of trauma as, like what you said, sexual abuse, physical abuse, car crash, veteran returning from war. And then people go, well, I haven't got any of that, so I'm not traumatized. Okay. That stuff definitely is trauma. Trauma is also some experience. So let's say I'm in grade 2 and I'm a bit of a shy kid, and I want to put my hand up in class and answer a question. And I put my hand up, and the teacher tells me I'm wrong, and the entire class laughs at me and is kind of pointing at me, right? And I feel all this shame and fear. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, for a lot of kids, they mightn't store that impression. For some kids, they might completely internalize that shame and fear, not be able to deal with the actual emotion, because we're not taught how to deal with emotions. Okay.
Yeah.
We didn't learn it at school. Mum and dad didn't know how to do it. So we're never taught how to deal with it. So we internalize. So if I internalize that shame and not deal with it, I can start to create a belief about myself that I'm never going to speak up again. Right. So then what happens? This root event starts what's called a gestalt, which is a series of events in our life that are all linked, which means that, 20 years later, I can go to speak up to my boss at work and ask for a raise, and that exact same fear and shame comes up in my system, and I don't do it. Or I'm in a relationship and I want to express to my partner my needs, and as soon as I go to speak up, that fear and shame comes up and I shut down. Okay, that's a trauma response. I've stored that impression in me. I wasn't able to digest that experience. One of them for me was, I was 7 years old and I was waiting for my dad to get home from work, and I was just so excited because I wanted to kick the footy with him, right? And so mum's in the kitchen making dinner. I'm running up to her every 20 seconds. I'm like, Mum, when's dad coming home? When's dad coming home? She's like, yeah, soon. I'm annoying the hell out of her. Finally, dad pulls in the driveway and I run out to the car holding the footy, and I'm like, Dad, let's kick the footy. For whatever reason, he just snaps, just goes off at me. So I'm not bloody kicking the footy, get inside. Just starts berating me, which is really out of character for my dad. He's a nice guy. But I've gone from ecstatic to crushed, and I run to my bedroom bawling my eyes out and have all this sadness and hurt come up in me, and I don't know what to do with it. Yeah, like I said, I wasn't taught, right? So the sadness and hurt is so intense, and I never want to feel that again. So my trauma response, trauma is very intelligent, right? So it starts to create a belief that I'm not worthy and I'm not good enough, right? And that's in order to try and protect me from feeling that emotion to the same extent when I'm older. It's basically trying to prepare me for threat. It's a survival mechanism, okay? What's a survival mechanism in the moment becomes very dysfunctional later in life. So all of a sudden, I have this belief that I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. So let's say 10 years later, I'm 17 and a school teacher, a male school teacher, yells at me the same kind of way my dad did that day. Guess what? 7-year-old Ryan comes up. That same feeling of sadness and hurt, and that same feeling or voice that says you're not worthy, you're not good enough, okay? And this keeps happening. That's 2 examples I've given. We have dozens, if not hundreds of these going on. So all we're doing is we're playing out these loops. So what happens, we're feeling the same emotions over and over again. We think that an emotion we feel today is new. It ain't new. It's an echo from the past. And we just have these echoes going on over and over the time. That's why things are so subjective. That's why I can walk into it, or two people can be listening to me talk now, and one of them will go, oh, I love this guy, I love what he's talking about, this is awesome. Someone else will go, this guy sounds like an absolute dickhead and I can't stand him. So who's right? None of them are right. They're making a assumption based on their emotional imprints from the past. I might have a voice that sounds like their uncle who was an absolute asshole to them when they were younger, and that's what their decision's being made of. So what happens? We have all these little traumas, that happen, and neglect is a trauma. So this can be even more pervasive. Like I was, if babies are left to cry it out, you're about to have a baby, Jack. Like, this is something to think about. It's a very touchy subject for people. If babies are left to cry it out when they're really, really young, that can cause massive nervous system dysregulation and trauma in their system, right? Because they go into a sympathetic nervous system response, which is crying and anger. And if their needs aren't met, then they'll go into a shutdown or freeze response. And all of a sudden we'll go, oh, they stopped crying. Good. Yeah, they stopped crying, but they've gone into a complete shutdown and freeze response. And if that happens enough, they'll become a shutdown and frozen adult, and they'll start to try and use things to try and deal with that. So trauma is very, very more open than what a lot of people think. And trauma is part of the human condition. Like, we all have them to a varying degree. So if you imagine we're on a spectrum, as soon as that spectrum is, we start to dip towards the heavier end, this is when we're going to start to need to use things to try and deal with that. It's like, I use the analogy of like we're born with an invisible backpack, and that backpack's nice and light. We may have some imprints from in the womb or genealogically, but it's pretty empty. And then we go through experiences of life emotionally that we're not able to digest and process. So we kind of chuck a potato in the back, and then we keep chucking these potatoes in the back. And over time, that thing gets heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier. And we get older, and we might, have a good D&M with a friend or talk to someone. And we might let 1 or 2 potatoes go, but more's going in that's coming out. And so over time, the emotional load gets heavy. When that emotional load gets heavy enough, we'll manifest some type of symptom. That can be depression, anxiety, bipolar, addiction, alcoholism, codependent relationships, addiction to sex, shopping, food, whatever it is. It will manifest in different ways, but it comes from this heavy emotional load, which means we want to escape from that feeling of heaviness.
So it's, mate, the way that you're able to articulate what goes on through someone's kind of human experience emotionally, mentally, and I guess spiritually in a way is unbelievable. And it makes so much sense when you explain it. So the question that automatically jumps into my mind, right? Because this show for me is kind of partly selfish as well. I want to get good ideas out there to people that might be, struggling with addictions or interested in drugs and alcohol, whatever it is. But it's also a bit of like discovery for myself as well. And the question that jumps into my mind and that I always have is surely everybody experiences some of those things in their life growing up or whatever it might be that you just described. But what's the difference between you and me that have had those experiences that end up, sucking on the end of an ice pipe all day or whatever, to, people that don't? Is it like that thing that almost like that Russell Brand says, is that like everybody's addicted in some way it's like a sliding scale. It just might not be to drugs and alcohol or to something that's completely harmful. Like what is the difference? Like what? Yeah, I don't know if you can answer that, but it's just a thing that I always find interesting.
No, absolutely. So there's probably two answers to that, and one is the people who tend to, not accumulate as much trauma or end up at the heavy end of the spectrum, which is going to result in a coping mechanism, had some conditions in their life early on where they were able to actually work through that. So they had very, very strong attachment relationship to their caregiver, mainly their mother, where they felt safe. Okay, safety is everything. We run into issues in life when that connection isn't strong, and so we don't feel safe in our own skin after that. Okay, even if we go through something at school and we feel completely safe to open up and then talk to someone, especially a caregiver, about that, means our system can start to come down. I was talking about the nervous system before, so without getting kind of too technical here, I spoke about sympathetic nervous system and shutdown response, which is called a dorsal vagal response. We also have something called a ventral vagal, which is what mammals have created, is that whenever we have social connection, especially early on, we can come out of those two dysfunctional nervous system states into a safe state, right? So that's why we're always going to have these traumatic circumstances. But if we have someone who we can sit with comfortably and express to, parents that are really emotionally aware, I think that will happen in future generations to come, then we're just going to accumulate less and less of this baggage, which means we're going to seek less for a coping mechanism later on. There's that. But now there's also, people who are down that heavy end that don't turn to drugs or alcohol, but what they do, they just find a coping mechanism that's more socially acceptable. So let's say, someone becomes a workaholic and all of a sudden they're working 60-hour weeks. They're neglecting their wife and kids. They're an asshole when they get home. They're always stressed. Society would look at that person and go, look at them go, what a go-getter. They're killing it, right? But the thing is, that workaholic and that junkie, in inverted commas, injecting on the street, it's the same trauma response. They've just found something different that worked. Because what happens, we'll kind of work through things to find out what works. So ice and GHB work for me. Someone else, they might do that and go, that didn't work. Heroin works, or alcohol works, or sex works, or relationships. Like so many codependent relationships right now, trying to complete ourselves with someone else. That's a trauma response as well. So we just kind of, I think the answer to your question is we just find different responses to this stuff. But the people who had really, really strong attachment and safe connection in those early years won't tend to be dipping into the coping mechanisms later in life.
Super interesting. So, sorry, and do you still have a bit more time? I've just got a few questions here. Cool.
As long as you need, mate.
So, two questions. I'll ask the more charged one secondly, because you mentioned that you work with families and stuff. But how do you strike the balance with trauma? And maybe this is a bit of like society narrative that's kind of running around in my head. But how do you strike the balance with, like, say, like kids or just people that are moving into recovery to kind of build resilience, I guess you'd call it, but also kind of be true to that vulnerability and all that sort of stuff, and not like fall into the victim mentality, if that makes sense? And I think, like you mentioned men before as well, that's the other thing that I wanted to kind of ask is how do men do all of that but still be kind of manly, if you like? Like, I think there's some cool dudes out there that are starting to reshape the way that we think about, a man, which is like guys like Aubrey Marcus and Kyle King, who are quite kind of that stereotypical manly guy, but then they're really into like a lot of this kind of vulnerability and connection stuff and all that. So, how do you do that with people? How do you help them to view themselves and kind of be true to their biological nature, I guess, but then also tap into some of these other aspects? Yeah.
For men in particular, it's being able to integrate anger. Men have a real shutdown of anger. So do women, actually. But for men, anger has been seen as such a destructive emotion. And for a lot of men in our society, that emotion has been shut down big time. So we have a massive shutdown response whenever anger starts to come up in our system. That's super unhealthy, because what happens, that anger will find destructive ways to come out in someone's life. So the more that we work with someone's anger and start to integrate that, anger starts to, because anger's power, like in a good way, not in a bad way. It can be in a bad way, but anger is our power. So when you're talking about a healthy masculine is someone who can be vulnerable, so can get in touch with sadness and fear and own that, but then also they've integrated their anger, so they're actually empowered. Because what happens if a man hasn't integrated their anger and has just worked on all the vulnerability stuff, they become a very feminine kind of man, or so to speak. No, there's anything wrong with that, but the classic kind of masculine, we want to be able to hold both. And so a lot of men, it is you want to touch on both, because so many men don't have their anger integrated, and so they don't know how to properly set their boundaries and express that and give a solid no.
Yeah, and the reason I ask that is not to kind of stereotype men and say that this type of man is better than the other or whatever, but I do notice it as a big issue, is that when you get the kind of stereotypical manly man, big burly blokes coming to do this kind of work, it's very interesting to try and be able to navigate that with them and explain to them, that they can do all these things and still be, the man or the guy or the person that they want to be,
And oftentimes you have to really involve the partner in that as well, because one of the issues men have is that they, because I've had plenty of manly burly guys just getting vulnerable and breaking down in tears, and I love it, right? It's great, but then it's kind of, I love to speak to the partner as well in that instance, because men, not saying woe is men here, but this is the issue we run into. A lot of women who haven't done their own work will berate men, be more vulnerable, tell me your feelings, open up to me. And then when a man does, they can't handle it. And they go, stop,
be more of a man.
Because you got to imagine, men, we got this pent up stuff for decades, a lot of us. And so when we go, I'm going to open up, it's like, whoa. And then for women, they're like, well, that's too much. Put it back in, right? So men have also, we've been conditioned to put that back in, because it's taken so much. Imagine a man who's not been vulnerable for so long to finally become vulnerable, and then that gets told to put it back in. Then we're like, oh, stuff that, I'm not going to be vulnerable again. So oftentimes it's good to involve the partner in that, because they need to be able to hold that. They need to be able to hold it. And then if they can hold it, then all of a sudden you start to see a really healthy relationship, because the man is safe to be vulnerable, but he's also safe to be a real man as well and be in his power.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting. And the other question I was going to ask you about these like trauma responses, you were talking a lot about people's upbringings and feeling safe and all that sort of stuff. So when you're working with people and these issues come up, and I assume that's why you have the family program and all that sort of stuff, but how then do you kind of talk to families? Because I've had that a lot from family members as well, is that they will then ring you up and just be hysterical because they feel like they've fucked their kid up or something like that. You know what I mean? Where in a way they have, like unintentionally, or like those conditions have kind of sparked a lot of that, but it's kind of not about blaming them either. Yeah. How do you deal with that, or how do you talk to families about that?
Yeah, there's a whole thing in the course we have about blame and how it doesn't work. And this spoke back to even with clients and that victim thing as well, like the whole victim perpetrator idea. We need to let go of those ideas. As human beings, we have this inbuilt thing. If something is wrong, right? So it's like, if I'm on drugs, something's wrong. Or if my son or daughter's on drugs, something's wrong. Then if something's wrong, then someone must be to blame. So we're automatically looking for someone to blame. Whereas blame just keeps us stuck. We can't move forward if we're blaming in any way. I find that families, look, they're all going to be at a different place. And this is why I think education is so important. Everyone's going to be at a place where they're going to receive that education to a certain amount, but we want to plant seeds that will germinate at some point. There's some families who don't even want to hear about it. I spoke to that many families at the centre, and it drove me insane. They were less concerned that their son or daughter was an addict and more concerned that the other family members were starting to find out and it was going to affect their social status. And it's like, well, you've got a lot of work to do as opposed to your son or daughter. Then we've got we had a Facebook group for family members of ICE addicts and that kind of thing. And, Melissa was doing that, I had to remove myself from the group, because that's a group of people who don't want help. They just want to be able to complain to other people in a similar situation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Then we've got, our course, which is people who actually want this information, and we're getting great feedback from that. And then you've got people who was incredible. This lady, I did a talk with Holly Sinclair, a mutual friend, and we were talking about mental health and addiction, and I started talking about addiction and all that kind of stuff. And we finished the talk, and this lady came up to me, and she goes, "Yeah, I've got a son, 25. He's been struggling with ice addiction for so and so long, and I want to come and do your work and work on my traumas, because I know that's the only way that I can best help him." And I'm just like, oh, my heart. If only everybody could see it that way. Because what happens, a child or our loved one is playing out trauma responses, which is resulting in their addiction. But then our response to that, our resistance to that, is often our own trauma response as well. The amount of people who I see who, they were growing up and their father was an alcoholic, and so they're just freaking out that their son or daughter is going to develop that problem. And if they start to go down that path, they become like, they become Hitler, and they're just attacking, and it drives the son or daughter further into that behavior. And, a lot of the course is just letting go of this whole fix it mentality. We just got to, because here's the thing. If I need to fix someone, what message is that giving that person? It's giving that person a message they're broken in some way. And the feeling that they're broken is one of the reasons why they're using. So I'm actually reinforcing the underlying belief as to why they're using. So it's a different paradigm that families need to take, but they're going to be in a different place as to how much they're going to receive that information.
Yeah.
But it's always my thought, like even when people were coming in doing a consult with me and they couldn't quite grasp it, I knew that a seed was planted, and I knew that whether it's a few months, a year or so, it was just the light bulb was going to go off, and they were going to start to go and move in a better direction.
Yeah, so interesting, mate. Well, where can people find you if they have had a come to God moment, or they just love what you're kind of saying? Because I've had a few kind of hair raisers with listening to you explain it. Where's the best place for people to come and find the work that you guys are doing now?
Just the Centre for Healing on the socials, so Facebook and Instagram, the Centre for Healing. And I'll just bring up our courses site, because I always get the URL wrong. courses.centreforhealing.com.au. So it's got all of our courses and practitioner training and that kind of thing. But if you have a specific question about, yourself or someone, a loved one, then send us a DM through Instagram or Facebook. Awesome,
man. I'll make sure I put it in the show notes as well. Well, look, mate, I really appreciate you coming on. I feel like you kind of embodied me, of course, like better looking and more intelligent, and just kind of,
that sounds like a belief. We need to shift that.
No, but amazing, man.
I've got a few more wrinkles since becoming a dad. You'll go through that soon enough.
I hope so. Yeah, thanks, mate. I appreciate it. We'll definitely have you back on soon to talk about some more stuff, because I've got like 1,000 more questions for you. But yeah, that was awesome, dude.
Yeah, no problem at all, mate. Always happy to have a chat.
Hey YouTube watcher, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you and your family are doing well in these extraordinary times. I also want to ask you, can you please subscribe and hit the bell notification? We're really launching into our YouTube channel this year and want to build our audience so that we can progress through the ranks and basically get the message of recovery and hope and change and all that good stuff out there to as many people as we can. So we would love it if you would consider it and subscribe and help us out. Also, for anyone seeking help and information and resources, we've put together a 100% free online course that you can access. Link in the description. So if you are looking for help, hope that is something that can help you out as well. Until next time, see you in the next video. Peace.